Welcome to the Now I'm Ashley.
And I'm Adam.
Get out the slap bracelets and the flannels. Everybody start saving up for pogs, asking your parents for jabos, because it feels like, well, we're back in the 90s all over again with the recent attention given of violent content in video games, and it's the taking the blame for everything.
And now it looks like one judge has taken it upon himself to blame violent video games for problematic behavior as well.
Thanks, Judge.
Because one Illinois judge has banned a teenager from playing violent video games after the student made an alleged threat. Or some would say an ill-advised joke. But hey, he was told he could play Mario Kart at least.
Oh man, that's gonna give you some violent behavior. This comes on the heels of both President Trump making comments about violent video games in the wake of the Parkland, Florida school shooting, and recent proposals by a Rhode Island representative to tax violent video games as well. On top of all that, efforts are apparently underway for the president to meet with video game executives next week to discuss violent video games as part of an ongoing debate about school safety.
So all of these recent developments beg the question of whether or not gamers should be worried about the content in their favorite games getting extra scrutiny, because the movement is apparently gaining some steam.
Well, okay, which we'll talk about. But okay, here's what's happening. The Chicago Tribune reports that this violent video game ban was handed down to a sophomore from Roselle Lake High School in Illinois. The school was recently closed for a day due to a school shooting threat, leading the sophomore in question to vent about the closure later on Snapchat.
And while playing a violent video game, the student reportedly said of the closure, "Y'all need to shut up about school shootings or I'll do one."
Okay.
Don't say that.
Yeah, don't say that.
Avoid those words.
Even if that's intended as a joke, maybe not the best joke to make right now, especially given the school shooting in Parkland, Florida, which is why his campus was closed in the first place, since officers were investigating another alleged threat.
After Florida Sheriff Departments have been roundly criticized over failing to act on multiple threats made by the school shooter in that instance, the Roselle Police Department naturally responded quickly to this sophomore's joke, which they deemed as a specific threat to his school, and promptly arrested him. Good. He's now been charged with felony disorderly conduct.
So at his court appearance, the sophomore's defense lawyer acknowledged that it was a joke made in very poor taste, and his parents also testified there are no guns in the home for him to carry out anything like this anyway. A police search of their home actually backed that up as well. No guns.
So the judge let the kid go with the caveat that he should be placed on indefinite home detention and had to give up his cell phone.
Not my cell phone. Turn off my cell phone.
Delete Snapchat. However, there was one additional penalty that added to all that. The judge also banned him from playing violent video games anymore.
Wow. Fortunately, he still has some options in terms of gaming, because the judge reportedly said you can play all the Mario Kart you want.
Very specific.
Very specific.
I guess Nintendo games won't cause any violence. Oh wait, what about that time a couple of months ago in Houston where 3 dudes got shot over an altercation during a Nintendo gaming session?
They were probably playing Mario Party, weren't they? I mean, come on, Mario Party. That's gonna cause more anger than like any other game I
lost all of my elementary friends to Mario Party.
So, I'm going to talk about this some more, but it is important to acknowledge that there are two sides here. On the one hand, it's good that the police are making sure to follow every potential threat, because that was an issue with Parkland, and this was definitely an instant of the kid not realizing maybe potentially the power of social media, and that, hey, certain words can have consequences, especially in the wrong context.
And while he's fortunate that nothing more serious happened, in the end, if the worst thing that happens to you after these charges is a night of juvenile detention and losing your phone and video games, that's not a bad thing.
That's basically like getting grounded.
Right. It's still not a great sign for gamers that people in these positions have suddenly picked up the video games are too violent rallying cry all over again, though.
Right. So also, gotta say, one more time for the people in the back, not defending the kids, very poorly timed joke. It was definitely a bad idea. But the punishment here, blaming video games, it does seem to be a knee-jerk reaction based on some recent events.
Especially because it also brings up a lot of important logistical questions. How do you enforce something like this? Who decides what a violent video game is? Is it just the presence of a gun or shooting?
Like, would Splatoon 2 count?
Right.
It's like you are not killing anyone, sort of. I mean, you are, but you're not, and it's ink, and it's guns, but it's also not. How does that count?
Is it the presence of blood? What if you can turn the blood off? What about fighting games? There are a lot of factors to consider that make this seem a not very well thought out idea.
Right, like there's no specific delineating line. Now, for the county's part, they are saying this wasn't meant to be a punishment, but rather an extra precaution. State's attorney spokesman from DuPage County told Ars Technica they don't normally dish out these kinds of consequences, but wanted to based on the nature of the allegations. The spokesperson also singled out the ability to communicate with others in violent games, which would interfere with the home detention.
Newsflash, you can also do that in non-violent video games.
No, what they should do? They should just be like, you can only play Switch. No worries about talking to anyone.
All of this shows that the video games are too violent pivot that political figures have made in the wake of the Parkland shooting is definitely having an effect around the country.
Yeah, following the Parkland shooting, President Trump said, "I'm hearing more and more people say the level of violence on video games is really shaping young people's thoughts." And then he also called for potentially like a rating system for video games and movies that tells you if they're violent, which we have. And in addition to that, a Rhode Island state representative is drafting legislation that would add a violent games tax to purchases of like 10% and then use that to fund mental health in schools because it's the violent games that are doing it.
And now the president is apparently going one step further. As part of the discussion around school safety, Trump has set his sights on the video game industry.
Great.
NBC News reported this week that the president will be sitting down to discuss video game violence with some of the gaming industry's top executives.
At a press briefing, Press Secretary Sanders said this meeting will be for executives to see what they can do on that front, indicating maybe some changes coming from the top of the industry, but again, probably too early to say anything just yet about what that could look like.
Seriously, aren't we supposed to be past all this?
I mean, isn't Jack Thompson gone?
Right. I haven't heard his name in years.
Like this could never happen again. And yet.
In recent years, there have been a number of studies performed about violent video games and whether or not they have a lasting impact. And so far, lots of evidence seems to suggest that it doesn't.
German researchers out of the University of Lübeck, for instance, covered, I don't know how to pronounce that. It's got dots above the U, so just go with me here on this. I'm sorry, Germans. Covered 15 male gamers who'd played violent video games for at least 2 hours a day for the past 4 years using an fMRI to look at brain activity. And nope, neither section of the brain associated with empathy or aggression saw any change. So on the downside, I guess it doesn't make you more empathetic either.
What does it not change? Like if you cry during a video game, does that not trigger that?
Man, I cry during video games all the time.
Right.
A more recent study from the University of York similarly couldn't find a link between violent video games and behavior.
And on top of that, some of the most infamous studies that indicated the reverse may be true have been recently redacted, such as the Boom Headshot report from a 2012 that...
It's just the headline of that. Like, that was the name of your report. Cool.
A report from 2012 that led to an Ohio State University PhD getting her doctorate revoked after the study was redacted for irregularities late last year.
So, yeah, given all that, sure, a little strange we've got a judge handing down punishments based on something that isn't based on any kind of data, and politicians leaning really hard into the video games being too violent angle despite limited findings on that subject, and some would say no findings at all.
As for whether or not gamers should be worried that this will affect their favorite pastime, well, this is the flip side to the loot box conversation that we mention every time gamers get upset that the government isn't stepping in to curb predatory microtransactions even more than they are.
Which these days seems like there are developments on that front like daily.
Right. You don't always want politicians muddying in the waters in your hobby, especially if they don't know what they're talking about. Which,
for politicians in video games, yeah, pretty frequent. It's important to remember something similar did happen as well after Sandy Hook back in 2012. Then Vice President Joe Biden met with TV industry executives and video game executives as well. That ultimately led to nothing except for the recommendation of further study on the effects of violent media.
For now, we'll wait and see if video games continue to shoulder the blame for violence in schools, because unfortunately the idea seems to be getting some traction.
All right, what do you guys think of this judge handing down a penalty to stop playing violent video games, and more pressure being put on the industry about content because it's video games' fault? Let us know in the comments.
For future updates on all things gaming, remember to like this video, and if you're new around here, subscribe to the know.
You know what? Subscribe anyway.
Yeah, just do it. So all these recent developments beg the question of whether or not gamers should be worried about the content in their favorite games getting extra scrutiny, not security. I'm gonna go back up, sorry.
The Chicago Tribune reports this violent video game ban was handed down to a sophomore from Roselle Lake. The Chicago